So this is kind of embarrassing. When I was really young, there was a particular nursery rhyme that scared me. And I know that sounds pathetic, probably is, shut up. But of all things, it was row, row, row your boat. And the reason it scared me was the very last line. I remember being confused and really bothered by it when I was younger. So the song goes, row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream. I didn't like that last part, that life was a dream. That frightened me a lot, because if life is a dream, what if it's a nightmare?
What if I have a bad dream?
Well, I'm sure we can handle any dream you have.
What if I dream that you sent us away into the dark and we get hurt? Really hurt? And what if I'm so sad and scared of the dark out there that I put poison in me for years and years until my blood turns into poison and my heart breaks right in half and I can't feel anything happy. Till I can't stand it anymore and I have to die. Until I'm on a silver table with my jaw wired shut. Would you wake us up from a dream like that?
We like to think that nightmares only happen in our sleep. We wake up and everything is okay. But The Haunting of Hill House engineers a tale of the reverse, where the dream is the safe place and the dark place you're sent out into is the real world, with all of its traps and its vices and its malice and its pains, particularly familial pains. The specter of Hill House crafts its foundation of fear by utilizing a strong sense of familial tension and sorrow. And in The Haunting of Hill House, this is all scattered throughout the life experience of 5 siblings: Stephen, Shirley, Theo, Luke, and Nell. So I gotta say, this show has been one of the most intense and fascinating experiences I've had as a horror fan in a really long time. It's scary in a way that you feel in your bones, you know what I mean? It's not surface level tension, it's a deep fear, it's a soulish kind of fear. It's like you turn off Netflix and it's still there, at least that was my experience. So when I started watching the show, I noticed fairly quickly how the house becomes a great vehicle of exploration. There are some very scary sequences with what I take to be very real and legitimate monsters in the show, but they're nothing without the light that they cast on the private psychological fears of the Crane family as they grow older. And I think one of the hard parts about watching this is, at the end of the day, this is a family who loves one another very deeply, but it's behind layers of trauma and loss. And with all of that love, with all of that shared love and innocence, one can see the temptation to keep it, to lock it into a room, maybe a red room, to bottle it up and not let the outside world take it from you. And you know, sometimes the purity of a thing can turn in on itself. And that's how the pain begins for the Crane family. So look, some housekeeping stuff before we jump into this. There are literally hundreds of YouTube videos made about the history of Hill House, from the Shirley Jackson book to the various Hill House films. I'm not going to cover those. There are tons of videos about the ghosts that you may or may not have missed walking around in the background throughout the house. I think with a show like this, at least for me, it devalues it to focus more on like the previous iterations of the Hill House story, or trying to locate this ghost or that ghost in a particular scene, you know, the 10 secrets you missed in The Haunting of Hill House, that sort of thing. To me, there's much more important stuff going on in The Haunting of Hill House. The show is kind of like a pot of gumbo, like mixed with paranormal stuff and psychological stuff and family stuff and time stuff. But at the end of the day, it's all about the characters and their interaction as a family, and how they look back on that one fateful night that everything went down at Hill House when they were kids, the sort of familial moment that defined them for the rest of their lives. In that one evening, Olivia Crane sent her children off into darkness, into a world with their own ghosts. So the metaphysical reality of all of the evil going on in the house aside, you know, this is a tremendous tragedy, because the thing that Olivia Crane was trying to protect her children from was sending them out into that nightmare. A nightmare where they're sent out into darkness. And I like the idea that there's this single tremendous event in your childhood that sort of defines you. I know a little bit about that world. It speaks my language a little bit. So for example, when I look at Stephen, I see a man who has intellectualized his fateful night at Hill House, who's put it all on paper, as it were. In fact, he's made a career out of it, one of the many sources of tension between him and his siblings. When it comes to ghosts, he's skepticized them all away. He thinks it's just madness. And this is probably the character I felt was more like myself. He's a fixer. He wants to fix things. When he was a kid, you'll notice that he was always asking his dad to help fix things around the house. When he's older, he apologizes to his wife for their rift, and when he does so, he tells her, look, I just want to fix this. He's a fixer. He's hid the fact that he had a vasectomy from his wife, which is probably not a good idea. That night at Hill House has left Stephen too frightened to bring a child into the world because he doesn't want to pass on the familial madness that he sees as hereditary. He thinks that him and his siblings are nuts because of the ghosts that they see, and so he doesn't want to bring a child into the world to damage it. It's no wonder his ghosts look the way that they do.
She's kicking. Oh, she's hungry. She must be an eater like her dad. If she eats me from the inside and I burst like a blister. Like your mother.
So when I look at Shirley, I see the reliable one, the responsible one, the one who took her fears, looked at them in the face, and then made them her strength. As a child, she didn't have the courage to look at an open casket, and now she's a funeral director, and there's power in that. But with Shirley, that power bends too far one way. She's too tough. You get the sense that she's emotionally distant even from her husband. Shirley wants to fix death. When a client's grandchild comes into the funeral home, she tells the young boy that she'll fix his grandmother, and that seeing her fixed will help him be able to look at her one last time. Think of the scene when young Shirley finds those kittens. Olivia Crane tells Shirley, kittens aren't supposed to be without their mommies, and no matter how much you love them, you're not their mommy. And that's a rough thing to hear for someone who's about to lose their mom. It's no wonder her ghosts look the way that they do. When I look at Theo, I see empathy. She has something like a gift where she can absorb the experiences of another person by touching them. She's more in tune with the experiences of others. And this isn't immediately apparent given her rough exterior. She basically looks like Angelina Jolie fighting for custody of her kids. That's sort of her resting face. She has the most overt defense mechanism of all of the siblings, in my opinion. She keeps her lovers numerous but superficial. She doesn't want to be fully absorbed by other people's experiences, other people's pain and trauma. Theo is a reminder that being close to somebody can oftentimes be overwhelming. It's no wonder that her ghosts look the way that they do.
Shh. I'm loving you. No.
When I look at Luke, I see someone desperately wanting to be affirmed, to be believed. When he's a child, nobody believes that he has a friend named Abigail who comes out of the woods to play with him. This need to have faith restored in him, for him to be believed, is central to who he becomes later on in life. Nobody believes he's sober. His coping mechanism, heroin, is probably the most outwardly and obviously destructive of him and his siblings. So it's no wonder that he faces the most familial judgment in this show. There's a sense in which when you look at Luke, you're waiting for him to get past a barrier, to stop playing games, to get right with himself, to grow up and put on his big boy hat. And what's different about Luke in comparison to all of his other siblings is that the closer he gets to victory in his fight, the closer his phantasm comes. It's only when he's steps from victory that he comes face to face with the monster that's been following him. It's no wonder his ghost looks the way that it does. And lastly, we have Nell. Nell is the unheard sibling. Her cries for help go unheard. In fact, this happens literally when she's a child in Hill House. There's a scene where nobody in the house can find her or hear her despite her being right there. And this will later be represented by her suicide. Prior to that suicide, there were cries for help, so to speak. The calls she makes that don't get picked up. Her victory, though, is ultimately in bringing her family together, though, particularly in episode 6, to confront their demons together. She sort of reunites the family, as it were, through her suicide. The unheard suddenly becomes deafening. Nell is sort of the tragedy that heals. You know what I mean? That's who she is in the show. She makes her siblings confront their ghosts and each other. In a sense, she sort of pulls them back from that darkness. And I gotta say, what makes this show so great is, like, think of how easy it would be to fall into the trap of just relying on a single motif here, like mental illness or maybe the mold in the house making them all hallucinate. It would have been really easy just to throw that in there as kind of an explanatory mechanism for all of the horrific shit this family is seeing in the show. But it doesn't do that. It keeps things complex purposefully. In The Haunting of Hill House, at the end of the day, there's really two different sorts of monsters. The metaphysically tangible apparitions that actually haunt the family, and the psychological ammunition those apparitions exploit over time. Both of those things are monsters, and they're interwoven together perfectly throughout the narrative. So to sort of summarize my thoughts on The Haunting of Hill House, I'd say that this show is a reminder, not to sound too dramatic, that real life is sometimes the horror movie, that sometimes real life is that dark nightmare, that life is often filled with the damaging of relationships, the horror of memory, and the specter of grief. And all of the raw materials that kind of make up this deep fear are things that are already within us. They're a part of us. And how much stronger of a canvas can there be to paint that specter of horror on than the family? Your family is supposed to be the closest thing you have to you in this world. And the closer you are to someone, the more damage they are capable of inflicting. So what a tool to be exploited by malevolence. Familial horror, when it's done well, makes it sort of feel like the gravity of the world is just a little bit stronger, you know what I mean? Like it's a weighty kind of horror. For me at least, it's a reminder that when the things that are supposed to be the closest to you in your life, like your family, when those become objects of decay and trauma, life can really begin to feel like a bad dream.
You don't have to worry now, sweetie. That really bad dream? Of course I'd wake you.